Hello, everyone, and welcome to Season 1, Episode 3 of Blueshift Engage. I am Vijay Chittoor, co-founder and CEO of Blueshift. First up, thank you to everyone who has attended Blueshift Engage so far. We have had some great discussions the last couple of days, and I'm excited to get into today's session. Some housekeeping notes before we begin. If you have questions for our speaker at any point during the session, simply submit them using the Zoom Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We will be active on social media during all the sessions, hashtag Blueshift Engage. We also have a daily Uber Eats giveaway, and we'll be announcing the winner towards the end of the session. Finally, a quick note of appreciation for all of our sponsors, all of whom are great Blueshift partners. Please check them out. Now, we have people dialing in from all over the world today. And while we were waiting for the session to begin, we had the chance to do a quick poll. Let's check out the results. Okay, perfect. So which Netflix series has been your guilty pleasure over the last few weeks? Looks like Tiger King is a big winner, but a lot of people coming in for Ozark, and obviously, a bunch of people too busy to watch TV, schooling their kids. I think we should have added like an option there for e-learning, maybe binge watching a course on Udacity, but we'll get into that in just a little bit. Now, our theme today is about being adaptive and nurturing a learning mindset. This is a timely subject. It's a very timeless subject as well, but especially at a time like this, the importance of this topic cannot be overstated. This pandemic has caused a lot of changes to the way we live, some hopefully temporary, but some that might even be permanent. Many industries, many jobs are affected. And even before the pandemic, we've been living in a world that is changing faster than ever before. So if you're thinking about shaping your own future, your own career, or if you're shaping about thinking your company's future, it is absolutely critical that you embrace adaptability and learning mindset. That is why I'm excited today that our guest is Gabe Dalporto, the CEO at Udacity, someone who I think is uniquely qualified to speak about the subject for many reasons. The first reason is simply that he leads Udacity, the company that has educated millions of students in over 190 countries, enabling many people to pursue careers in cutting edge fields like artificial intelligence, self-driving cars, and many more. Blueshift has been fortunate to work with Udacity and the team there for close to 3 years, and we are very pleased to support this team on their mission. Now, Gabe's own career is another great reason why he can speak to today's topic. Prior to joining Udacity, he worked at LearningTree, incidentally also a Blueshift customer, where he held several leadership roles, including CMO, Chief Marketing Officer, and CFO, Chief Financial Officer. And we'll be digging into that a little bit more in our discussion to understand how he transitioned between these seemingly different roles and how he shaped his own career and how he cultivated that learning mindset for himself. During his time at LearningTree, he was instrumental in driving the company's transition from a micro-cap, mortgage-focused marketplace to a multi-billion-dollar, fully diversified financial services marketplace. During his tenure, LearningTree delivered the highest stock price appreciation for any public company, a whopping 6,745%. Wow, take a moment to let that sink in. Now, Gabe joined the LearningTree board in 2017. He continues to be an active board member there, so that's another perspective he can bring into the discussion, not just as a CEO, CMO, CFO, but also a board member of companies like LearningTree, but also a board member at Guitar Center. Finally, what I find interesting about Gabe is that he holds a bachelor's and a master's degree in nuclear engineering. Wow, okay. We'll be digging into how an MIT master's in nuclear engineering ends up in marketing, ends up becoming the CMO of LearningTree, and then obviously becoming the CEO at Udacity. So there's a lot to cover there. So with that, let's begin. Gabe, tell us first a little bit about how you're dealing with the lockdown at a personal level. I'm especially curious to know what you're binge watching. You're perfectly fine if you want to talk about a Udacity course, but I'm hoping you'll also talk a little bit about stuff on TV, stuff on Netflix. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I've been watching Killing Eve, and it's this interesting story about this female assassin named Villanelle, who is a psychopath, meaning she has like no emotions or feelings, or actually no empathy. and then this kind of desk jockey MI6 researcher named Eve. And so they're kind of going at each other, trying to, Eve is trying to capture Villanelle, but they're also kind of falling in love too. And there's a lot of, kind of gory assassinations. It's pretty interesting. It's a very complex story, but
fascinating.
Really enjoying that.
I'll have to add that to my list. Personally, I really got into Money Heist, and I must confess that the Bella Ciao song, if you've seen that series, is just stuck in my head. So there are a lot of interesting directions we can take today's discussion in. But just to get started, let's just start by asking you to tell us a little bit about Udacity for those who don't know. And obviously, you built a great global brand, so I'm guessing most people are familiar with it. But tell us a little bit about what Udacity does, what's your mission. And yes. I know there's a personal reason you are passionate about Udacity's mission. So talk a little bit about that as well.
Fantastic. So the mission of Udacity is to really upskill the world's workers on the careers of the future. And why that's relevant is the World Economic Forum before COVID predicted something like 1 billion people are going to lose their jobs due to AI, machine learning, or technology automation. And that's not just going to be blue collar workers, it's going to be, everybody. In fact, AI can read cancer off an x-ray better than a doctor can now, right? So everybody's job is going to be affected in some way. Many people's jobs are going to be totally disrupted. Why that's personally interesting to me is I grew up in West Virginia, and when I was growing up, there was a pretty vibrant economy there. You had nice downtown areas, you had country clubs, good middle class livings made by a lot of people. When that industry, mostly coal, automated, those jobs went away, and they never came back, right? And unfortunately, West Virginia did not upskill their workers. And so most people, if they have a job, are now working at Walmart, or nothing wrong with Walmart, but they're making minimum wage. And they're kind of making subsistence wages. The towns are boarded up, the country clubs are shut down. So to me, it's very personal. Like, how do I give back? How can we solve this problem that started in maybe Appalachia and the Rust Belt, but is rapidly expanding across the globe, with just disruption in the nature of work and upskilling people?
Yep.
Udacity,
no, that's a very, go ahead.
Sorry,
yeah,
go ahead.
Please. No, I think that's a very tough story to obviously see play out when you're growing up. And I admire your resolve to do something about reskilling the workers in your role at Udacity. I know that you as a company have done a lot of things over the course of time, but especially now with your pledge to American workers. So I'd love to hear more about that and how you think about this at Udacity.
Yeah, so there's a great program that was launched last fall called the Pledge to America's Workers. Udacity was one of the founding members. We're on the board. It was started by the White House. It has participants, Tim Cook at Apple, IBM, Amazon, all kinds of great companies. And it's a great program. And it's basically asking enterprises, companies, and learning institutions like Udacity to step up and pledge to retrain workers across the United States. And Udacity pledged 100,000 scholarships over the next 5 years to really try and retrain the workers in the United States. And frankly, with COVID accelerating the nature of work, job losses, it's just become that much more relevant.
Yeah, could not agree more with you. So that's pretty remarkable, and thank you to Udacity for stepping up at a time like this. Now let's take a look back at your career, right, and you into your life as a marketer and a CMO before you transitioned to other roles, including the CEO of Udacity. You are a nuclear engineering graduate, an MIT graduate, right? So how does someone like you end up in marketing in the first place?
I don't know. I think it was in 2000, kind of right before the giant stock market crash, and I was working, actually. I was a nuclear engineer, but then had found my way into strategy consulting. I kind of love that. But strategy is a little bit hollow, and then you don't actually do anything. You just make lots of recommendations. And I was kind of thinking, like, what would I like to do? And I kind of ran to the exact opposite of engineering, which is coldly data-driven and analytical, into marketing, which is driven by consumer psychology and emotion. And so to me, that was like a way to really stretch myself. And And then getting into marketing, it was interesting, how the nuclear engineering skills kind of extended themselves, right? And so I think of any job function as just, like engineering, just a problem to be solved. So I think about like, what do I need to accomplish? Big goals. How do I break that down? How do I systematically learn all the, the different aspects of the job? And luckily I kind of found my way into, initially into direct marketing. So I started off in like direct mail. And that's very much just test and learn and data and analytics. And so I'd create all kinds of hypotheses, and I'd learn, really neat things about how people respond to different pricing structures, how they respond to different co-branding opportunities, and envelope sizes and all kinds of crazy stuff. And then that gave me a really good fact base in just what drives consumers, and was able to then move into digital marketing, ultimately into brand marketing. One of the interesting little anecdotes here is that at some point I figured out in the kind of mid 2000s that multi-level marketing, think Amway. The math behind multi-level marketing was not too dissimilar from the math behind a nuclear reactor. So, so sometimes the math even works out.
Yeah, it's a great insight. Sure. Yeah. No, it's great. I think, I think that's very relevant to the theme we are talking about today, where you could use the learning from one discipline to evolve your own career, but also keep learning, right? So we'll be talking more about that. But I think one of the things you talked about, which is the idea that marketing has in some ways become, obviously has a psychology element to it, has a brand element to it, but increasingly it has that data element to it. And sort of, I personally think of marketers as, I think there's a term around data scientists, and I think of marketers as data artists, if you will, right, where they have to really understand sort of the both the right brain creative stuff, but also the left brain analytical stuff. So how is that sort of, in your experience, how is that evolving? What is really, happening in that space? And you've seen in your own career that evolution over time. How is that changing even more today? And for the marketers who are in the audience today, what is your advice on what they should be doing to shape their career? What learning paths should they be embracing to be prepared for this?
Yeah, I cannot emphasize enough how important analytics will become as part of the marketing role. The old like direct mail bank marketers kind of realized pretty early that you could build predictive like logistic response models or whatever to, predict which individuals would be more likely to respond. That basic approach then has kind of moved on to the digital world, where you can track individual behaviors, conversion rates, LTVs, build basic, predictive models, but then, layering in machine learning, lookalike models. The math behind marketing has gotten progressively more sophisticated. Also, the trends that are affecting jobs in general will affect your job, right? And you see this within Google, where a huge percentage of the value add of a paid search marketer used to be in like developing bid strategies. And right now Google algorithms are very, very good at bid strategies, and often better than individual humans, and over time will be. And then that piece becomes totally commoditized. And so then you need to think about what's your next value add. How do you enrich your skill set to become and to maintain your relevance? And even Blueshift is a great platform. We loved it. We loved it at LendingTree. We love it at Udacity, and you have basic kind of machine learning built into there. And so like how do you leverage analytics? How do you understand, first of all, the power of analytics, which analytics apply in which situations, how to get resources aligned against that, like how to link that into the creative side of the business. But the world is moving more and more digital, more and more analytics driven, and and marketers are just going to need to be much more savvy there.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think in some ways we are very proud that we work with Udacity, because you are teaching the whole world about AI. And when it comes to kind of using AI and ML in your own customer engagement, we feel very fortunate that you chose Blueshift to power that piece of the business. But this is very interesting at multiple levels. But I want to maybe touch on something you kind of mentioned in passing, where as you talked about sort of how you shaped your career and how you got into marketing, you briefly mentioned that the crash in 2001, right? And you've seen obviously two big recessions, at least in your career prior to COVID. How have you seen businesses adapt to these different types of downturns? what have business leaders done to come out stronger on the other end? And how does the theme of sort of that learning mentality and adaptability play into that?
Yeah, I think the important learning from big disruptions like this is it causes big lasting changes and big innovation, right? And so if you think about the Expedias of the world, the travel sites, they really came into mainstream after the 2001 crash, when the large chains actually needed them, right? And so a lot of innovation happened after the crash of 2000 and 2001. A lot of innovation happened after 2008, and frankly, like, I don't think you've even scratched the surface with those two compared to what COVID is doing, right?
Yeah.
So I think, like, disruption, doors open and doors close in any sort of kind of crisis situation. And I think what marketers have to do is really find the doors that are opening and then run through those doors as fast as you can. And, I'll tell you a story, like for us at Udacity in particular, in early March, we started to see, back in February, you could see COVID coming. We were one of the first companies to shut down our offices and move to work from home. And we kind of saw what was going to happen, and, hundreds of millions of people being quarantined and losing their jobs. Many of those jobs are never coming back, right? So anything that can be automated will be automated, and that's going to just accelerate. Many of those jobs are just gone forever. And so we saw this coming. We said, well, let's put on our empathy hat. Like let's put ourselves in the shoes of, of these people who have just lost their jobs. They have the wrong skill sets. And how would we, what do we need right now? And so that changed how we were going to market with our consumer product. And so we opened up our platform for, the entire month of April, made it free. And we saw something like a 20x increase in people on our platform. And it was a big bet, right? We thought, like, holy cow, like we don't know what our financial footing is. Like, are we going to make this bet? Like, I don't know. Like, and we said, but it's the right thing to do. And it's what's needed in this moment. And we saw this huge flood of registrations, and it was kind of a true win-win, because a ton of needy students who had been, laid off and didn't have money to pay for the program, they were able to just go heads down, work their tails off, and complete a full nano degree, which is like a pretty good, employable job set. Think of, like, you want to be a machine learning engineer, that's like a nano degree. And they were able to complete it in a month, right? And so a lot of people got the skills they needed to get the next job in a month in the free period. And tens of thousands of incremental people experienced our platform, and many of them continued through the paid platform, right? So it was a win for us financially. It was a win for the students who actually needed, to get the skills in a short period of time for free. And it's that type of, like, realizing the situation that you're in today and taking maybe decisions you wouldn't normally take, is what creates innovation.
No, that's fascinating. I love what you said about, doors open and doors close, and you'll see which doors are opening and go through the open doors as fast as you can. And obviously that applies at a personal level, at an individual level. But in this case, I think the anecdote you shared can apply it at an organizational level, where you were able to take all of Udacity, your whole team, and have them go in this new direction, which clearly paid off great dividends. 20x increase in in audiences, just fantastic, just amazing, off the charts. So how do you cultivate that mindset in your company? How did you get Udacity, even before this crisis happened? How did you get the company ready for adapting to a changing landscape, right? Obviously, you didn't know COVID was coming, at least last year, but clearly you as a company were prepared to adapt, change course, try new things. And that's a fascinating subject, beyond obviously just changing your personal career. So touch on that for a little bit.
Sure. So I joined Udacity back in August, and I was very fortunate in that my predecessors had built, like, a really great product. The product is amazing. It works. It transforms lives. It transforms careers. We weren't executing that well, right? And so, thankfully I had enough time to, but a great group of people, talented people. And one of the fundamental things I saw was really just a lack of data-driven, fact-based decision-making. And so historically, a lot of decisions were made kind of in a vacuum without a ton of data to support it. And so one of the first things I did was put in, a culture of like, we are going to make decisions based on data, decisions based on fact. We're going to do a ton of like A/B test and learn, multivariate testing, and we're going to let the data guide us. And then one of the first opportunities I got to prove myself wrong, I publicized to the company in front of everybody in all hands. I said, listen, I had a hypothesis about how we should message. We have this mentor reviewer network, which are effectively tutors. I had a hypothesis. People don't know what that means. We need to message it differently. We threw it into an A/B test. Turns out I was wrong, and I raised my hand and said, "Data wins, CEO loses." Like we're going with we're going with this.
That's great. That's great.
And so I think a lot of the foundation is just building that culture of like rapid iteration, rapid test and learn. And then once you have that motion going, it's a lot easier to throw in like a disruptive idea. I think, and this probably doesn't come as like a surprise to anybody in this audience, but a lot of companies are, living in the qualitative world of the past and not living in kind of the data-driven world of the future.
No, that's fascinating. So it's interesting. I think we hear marketers talking about A/B tests all the time, but here you're talking about A/B testing big ideas, testing hypotheses. On Monday, I think we had Ant, who's the CEO of Zumper, and he talked a lot about how he built his growth engine, and again, very data-driven, investing in processes that sort of help track leading metrics and being able to understand the importance of leading metrics down all the way to this funnel. It's great to hear business leaders like yourself, and sort of thinking about how to create that infrastructure for experimentation, iteration, and growth. So thank you for sharing that. Now, let's go back a little bit to your career. We talked about the marketing aspects of it. You talked about how you applied sort of your engineering mindset, your quant mindset to come into marketing, but you also started embracing the right brain aspects of it, which is consumer psychology, the brand, all of that, and you sort of melded them both. But you did something very interesting after that, because the role you took on after being a CMO at LendingTree was the CFO at LendingTree. So how did that come about, and how did you prepare yourself to make that transition? And as you made that transition, what sort of came naturally to you, and what did you have to learn or unlearn?
Well, one Friday night, I got a call from our CEO, and he goes, "Hey, Gabe, I'm firing our CFO. Do you want to be the CFO?" And I literally said, "What the blank are you talking about?" So it was a total shock to me.
Right.
And he said, "No, really, I need someone who knows the business inside and out, who can be a strategic CFO, who can drive the business from the finance seat using data and analytics to provide insights and direction, and really be, strategically aligned with the business." I said, "Okay, I think I can do that. I've got a lot to learn." And it just comes back to my engineering roots of like understanding what the basic functions of a CFO are, which is like investor relations, capital raising, financial planning and analysis, accounting. And so I just took each of those functions, broke them down to what their elements are, made sure I had great people leading those functions, because I was never going to be like the expert in accounting, right? I'm just not a classically trained accountant. Right. So I made sure I had a really, really good person in accounting, because that was my weakness. And then I thought about investor relations as really kind of like sales and marketing, right? So investor relations is like telling a story and, to investors and helping them understand the value of your company, but that's just marketing and sales. Right. So that was pretty straightforward. And then I put on my strategy hat back from my strategy consulting days. And I said, okay, great. What do we need to do to step change, accelerate the business? And we needed to raise money. So we went out and raised $400 million. And then we used that to go buy some companies, where if you took LendingTree plus another company, you put them together, and it was like 1 + 1 = 5. And so, so we were able to find some really great acquisitions. It was very, very uncomfortable in that learning phase, right? Because I just didn't know what I didn't know. But if you systematically think about a problem and you break it down in a job role and job skill, like you can learn a new job in 4 months, 6 months, and you can get really good at it in about a year. And so that was the approach I took, but it was a surprise to me.
That's interesting. No, I think it's great to hear you say that you were uncomfortable. And I think the lesson here is it's okay to be uncomfortable as long as you have that foundation in really learning, having that mindset of knowing what you know, but also knowing what you don't know. In your case, you partnered with some great folks who brought complementary sets, complementary skill sets, and you also sort of leaned on what you knew well, which is how do you analyze data and tell a great story. And guess what? It turns out, as part of the CFO's job, you're to tell, analyze the data and tell a great story to investors in Wall Street, and that's somewhat similar to sort of the CMO job. So oftentimes, I think we don't think about how some of these seemingly disparate jobs are actually similar at a very, very fundamental level if you break them down into those components. So that is fascinating. That's great to know. Were you when you sort of like say you were obviously uncomfortable in the beginning, were you comfortable sort of letting your team know that you were uncomfortable? How did everyone perceive this around you? Because I'm guessing a lot of people in the audience today, they're looking to shape their career. They're looking to take on exciting, new, challenging roles. And what's your advice for how do you sort of deal with that initial feeling of being uncomfortable?
Yeah, I mean, you have to be honest with people, and it's okay to be a little bit vulnerable. I think people will respect that, and also people want to help you if you share some vulnerability. So yeah, I think you have to be straight with what you know, what you don't know, and you have to think about like what value when you're moving between one role to another. You have to think like what unique value do you bring to that role, and make sure you emphasize that, right? And so I brought like a really great insight into the business. I brought like some really good strategic perspective, much different than a super operational CFO, right?
Right.
And I knew I was never going to be great at accounting. I knew that like there were tactical things that the people reporting to me were much better at than I'd ever be, but I could help every one of them in their career. So like our head of accounting, I helped her become a better leader. Right. And so, and the head of HR, I helped him think like a marketer, or not HR, but investor relations. And so, in each of these, you bring unique values and skill sets, and you think, what's the complementarity? How do I learn as much as I possibly can, knowing that like I haven't spent my career in finance, I'm not going to learn everything, and like where can I, make it even better?
That's fascinating. No, it's great. I think you obviously start on a weaker footing in some areas when you take on a new role. But you should not forget the strengths that you bring to bear on this new situation. And sometimes the kind of strengths you bring to bear might be really unique to you, and people around you would value that. And obviously you're learning from your teammates, but you're also at the same time enriching them with that new perspective. So, that's a fabulous sort of insight. And thank you for sharing with our audience that it's okay to be vulnerable, okay to be uncomfortable. I feel like learning should not stop when you get to a new role. In fact, it should just begin. And thank you for sharing everything you talked about in terms of how you molded Udacity to have that learning mindset as a company. At Blueshift, one of our core values is make new mistakes, and we encourage sort of that constant learning mindset in our own company. Now, switching to maybe a slightly related but different topic. You've had a very successful career. You've been, CMO, a CFO, board member at public companies. You've been CEO at Udacity, which is fantastic. And you've clearly learned a lot through the course of that career. A lot of the people who are in the audience right now are probably thinking, how does a listener right now distill all of these lessons that you've learned and apply it to their own career? So maybe I want to ask you a little bit about reflecting on, not today's version of you, but reflecting on yourself, let's say as a 30-year-old, right? So what business advice, what career advice would you give to this younger version of yourself, and stuff which you might have maybe not fully applied in your own career? Obviously, you've done great in your career and you've applied a lot of these lessons, but what are some of the pieces of business advice or career advice that you would give to a 30-year-old version of yourself?
Awesome. So, everybody has different strengths and weaknesses, and so the advice I give to myself might be different than the advice that I would give to others. And so I'll tell you what I thought I did well, and that would be good advice for others. And then what I particularly individually sucked at. So what I did, at 30, what I did well was, number one, I was like just very ambitious and driven. right? And I had
Yeah.
very high sights for myself, had very high expectations for myself. And like, literally, I didn't need my boss to criticize me because I was criticizing myself all the time because I had very, very high standards. So I think number one, just like be ambitious, have high standards, expect better of yourself every single day. And if you're not getting better every day, then you're stagnating. Number two, I love solving big, hard problems. And so, you know, anytime there is, you know, and this is like a key piece of advice I give to everybody that I mentor, which is anytime there's a big problem without a clear owner, ask for the ball and run with it. Right. And so special projects are amazing. Like a lot of times there will be like a company wants to do something, but there's no owner for it because it's a new initiative. Just raise your hand. Just take it and run with it and take initiative and by God, deliver it and get everybody in line. I was also, you know, super analytical and structured about how I approach problems. So great, you know, just good problem solving. I thought of like any challenge, even if I didn't know anything about it, I figured I could break it down and figure out what the drivers are and solve it. Now, what I really sucked at was the people part of it. And so, and that's fine. It's okay being like smart and good at your job up until probably the director level, when your job becomes big enough that you really have to work with peers to get stuff done, right? And when I got to that level, like I did a 360 review, and like my boss loved me, my subordinates loved me, and my peers hated me. I'm like, oh shit, I had no idea. and the reason was like I wasn't an asshole. Sorry for the French, but like it was much more. I just didn't get them involved in the process, and so they're like, and I had I didn't have good, like, because I like grabbing stuff and like in learning and tackling problems. Like anytime I saw a problem, even if it wasn't in my area, like I'd say, oh hey, here's a solution. And I thought they'd be happy because I gave them a solution, and they're like, why are you in my area? And so then I realized, okay, great. Like if I want to be successful, I need really strong peer relationships. I need to attach to their goals. I need to bring them along the solution development so that like I can add value, but they feel ownership and they you know, frankly feel like they develop the solution, and then everybody wins, right? And give tons of credit. And so that took me a while to figure out how to really develop those relationships, how to work that muscle. So that may or may not be a problem with, you know, various people listening, but, you know, I think that and the other key, you know, points here around just, you know, grabbing the ball, breaking down problems, you know, taking initiative. I think those are all just super important in your career.
Very, very cool. No, that's fascinating. Now let's talk a little bit about, I think while we were chatting, we popped up another poll for all participants. And really the idea of the poll was to try and understand, you know, we touched on how the future is, you know, changing very, very rapidly, specifically in the world of marketing. You know, everything is becoming AI powered. I think you touched upon, you sort of said earlier in the discussion, you said everything that can be automated will be automated. Now, there are a lot of interesting angles from there. So firstly, I think if you if you just look at the poll, when we ask people how prepared do you feel for a future where marketing is AI powered, you know, 73% of people said on this audience said, you know, they need to learn some new tricks, and 9% said they need to unlearn a bunch of stuff and start from scratch. You know, so that's interesting and fascinating. You know, I think there's also like you know, there was a semi-frivolous question all there, which was kind of saying afraid that AI bots will make my job obsolete. And sometimes AI automation feels like it's kind of taking jobs away rather than creating something new. So how do you think about, when you look at these poll results, what do you say to you know, individuals and organizations that need to learn those new tricks? How should they go about it, specifically in the realm of marketing? Are there things they should be learning about? Are there things they should be concentrating on right now? And secondly, leading up from there, talk a little bit about this whole fear factor of AI automation, you know, and sort of what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think we talked about this a little bit earlier. Everyone in marketing, unless you're a designer, like should be thinking about how to embrace digital analytics. You know, at Udacity, we're probably the single most comprehensive place to learn about analytics, AI, machine learning, predictive analytics. It's the single best place in the world to do that. You know, digital marketing, we have a, you know, we have a marketing analytics nano degree that could then lead into like taking a predictive analytics nanodegree that could then lead into like data visualization nanodegree. And so I would think about starting, if you haven't already, like a methodical training regimen around, you know, the various tiers of digital analytics, and definitely get at a minimum familiarity with predictive analytics and machine learning and AI, and, you know, ideally, you know, some hands-on training. There's great tools out there like Data Robot and Alteryx that make it much easier to actually get into these areas. There's a business analytics nanodegree that, you know, touched on the Alteryx platform. So I'd highly recommend taking your education in analytics seriously. Get familiar with some of the tools, try and apply them. And sometimes, like, you're going to be the one applying them. Sometimes you just knowing like the context and how to apply them is actually super valuable. We have like an AI for business leaders nanodegree that is non-technical, but at least goes over all the different you know, types of you know, and approaches to machine learning, and when they're applicable and when they're not applicable. So I would invest in your skill set, and guaranteed anything you're doing that is repetitive is going to be automated. And so look for the higher value add things that machines are not good at.
And what are those things in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, the real problem solving piece of it, like, machines can take like a repetitive task and automate it. They can, you know, look through masses of data and apply algorithms, but like knowing which algorithms to apply in which situations is you know, requires a lot of thought and creativity. You know, thinking, you know, the soft side of marketing is still super hard for machines to deal with, right? So creative development, messaging, and things like that. You can use the machines to help you get a lot of insights around the messaging and what messages or apply to which audiences. But, you know, the actual, you know, creative piece is still, you know, pretty hard for machines. But really just understanding, you know, how to, those things that require deeper, more complex thought, I think it was where machines have a harder time.
Very, very cool. No, I think I talk a lot about how, you know, I think if you make the machines your friend, they can actually unleash creativity at a scale that you've always imagined, but it's never been possible because, you know, I think you talked about one-to-one experiences, you talked about scaling up marketing, and marketers are very creative. So every time I talk to them, they're never short on ideas. And really, I think what they often struggle with is the toolkit, the set of things that would help them bring those ideas to life. And listening to you, I think as you talk about sort of the fact that, you know, marketing will never automate the creative parts, will not automate, you know, at least in the near term, will not automate the judgment parts of things. So essentially, this is an opportunity, I think, for marketers, business leaders, everyone to embrace AI, but actually become more creative, more strategic, and less focused on pushing just a bunch of buttons that they were doing till recently.
Yep, absolutely true.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think this has been fascinating so far. I think I've learned a lot already. I think your advice about, you know, the fact that, you know, everything that will be automated, that can be automated, will be automated. But at the same time, you talked about how when doors close, other doors will open, and that applied to a crisis, but also to sort of a rapidly evolving world. And obviously, the lessons you have in terms of adapting to that around building that learning mindset, raising your hand to pick up new projects, being comfortable, being vulnerable in front of people, all of those have been fascinating. Why don't we take a couple of audience questions and continue the discussion? So I think one of them I see is really around, you know, at some point you guys obviously focus a lot on online learning, right? And do you see, you know, how do you see online learning and offline learning sort of interacting with each other? Is there a world where both exist, or will they sort of meld and become one? What does sort of tomorrow's university look like? Because as we talk about learning and creating that mindset, we also have to prepare everyone here to figure out what those modes of learning will be. Where do they go to sort of pick up new skills in their career? Is it, you know, what kind of new universities are going to emerge?
It's a great question. And COVID has been a terrible, you know, disease, but it has done, you know, one positive thing, which is it has accelerated the shift to online learning by at least a decade. You have universities that have changed very little in 200 years. who are very slow and resistant to, other than a few notable exceptions like Arizona State University, WGU. But with a few exceptions, they've been very, very slow to adopt online learning. And then all of a sudden, every university in the world has to go to online learning literally overnight. And they're by and large doing it terribly. But to get good, you have to start somewhere, right? And so also, like in the corp enterprise world, we have a large enterprise business where we work with giant Fortune 500 companies to retrain thousands of people at the same time. Historically, most corporate training dollars were spent in live online training on premises. I cannot think of a single instance over the next 12 months where you're going to fly an instructor in, fly your employees in, jam them in a conference room for the next week. Like, that's not happening. That's dead.
That's absolutely not happening. Yeah.
Everything is going to go online a decade sooner than it normally would. So online learning is going to go through a sea change, and it's a disruptive time, but in a very positive way for people like Udacity. Universities are interesting. The Wall Street Journal just did an article a couple of days ago about how universities are expecting a $44 billion revenue shortfall this year. And they're not going to be able to, or many of them won't have people in dorms. They're like a big piece of their revenue stream is just dorms. A lot of people are going to take a gap year, because if you can't be on campus, what's the point? And so fundamentally, it's going to put a lot of universities, frankly, out of business. And it's going to shift the ways universities think about their business and their preparedness to deliver online. And frankly, it's hard. I mean, I'm the beneficiary of a great university education, but since the 80s, the rate of tuition increase has far outpaced inflation, to the point of 2 and 3x adjusted for inflation. And so that's not sustainable. So universities are going to have to think of themselves like a business, have a good value proposition, have pricing that's reasonable. But I think the big trend here is the realization that learning is lifelong. Universities, do a good job of taking kids and teaching them how to think. They don't necessarily do a good job of graduating people with real skill sets, like West Virginia University, who we're talking with about helping out their students. Their #1 degree program is journalism. Journalism is dead, right? So you're every single graduate from that program is going out going, I have no job. And so it's going to, I think, force a shift into more career-oriented education. I think it's going to dramatically accelerate certificate programs or job-related programs like Udacity, and the on-premises stuff, I think, is a tough sell.
Very interesting. No, that's fabulous. And it's interesting that you touched upon all these universities and the kind of programs that they've had. And I think COVID, a lot of unfortunate aspects to it. But I think, as you talked about earlier, when some doors close, others open. So obviously, universities might be closed, and people might not get 50 people. Companies might not get 50 people in a room to learn from an instructor. But at the same time, learning is not going to stop. I think the need for learning is not going to stop, and it's great to see a lot of new avenues. Now, let me switch to another question that came in from the audience, and this is really about, I think the question is really about, what do you think the biggest roadblocks to a learning mindset are? And do you have any personal strategies that have worked for you? And I guess when somebody asks you about the biggest roadblocks to a learning mindset, you could answer that at a personal level, at an individual level, saying what are your own mental roadblocks to sort of to a learning mindset, and then you could also answer that at an organizational level. So I would love to hear your perspective on both.
So it's interesting. I just had a student write me yesterday, and she was talking about this, and now she's completed 3 nanodegrees. But she was very concerned and scared to get started, and was really just scared about her own inabilities and fear that she would fail. And so I think the biggest obstacle to having a learning mindset is just fear and the willingness to take a risk on yourself. She is now addicted, right? So like she loves the program,
Right.
she wanted to take more, and
Right.
she got that because she succeeded. And you know, these programs are not easy, they're hard, they take work, they take time and dedication. And I think number one, like just get over your fear, whether it's learning something or taking on a new job or taking on a new, you know, responsibility within your job. Get over it and grab it, right? And
Right.
then putting, you know, the dedicated time every day to do it. It's just like working out. Like if you haven't been working out, and I feel this myself, and I've worked out pretty consistently throughout my life. Occasionally, like, I'll get injured and I'll take like 4 or 6 months off. It's a habit. Like it's really hard to get started. It's hard to wake up that one day and say like, I'm going to go work out, or I'm going to
Yeah.
go start a nano degree, or I'm going to take on this new opportunity or function. But once you do it for a couple of days, or actually once you do it for about 2 weeks, right, you're addicted and you'll never stop until you get hurt again or whatever, right? And so the same is true with education. Just put an hour, a half an hour a day for a week or 2 weeks, and you're on your path and you're gonna succeed. You have the skill sets, you have the ability to succeed. You just got to take that step.
Very, very cool. No, that's a great lesson. It's really about building that habit, almost like daily exercise, a daily routine, and you just have to be comfortable, and you get more comfortable if you take those baby steps. But you also
Yeah.
talked about sort of finding that success, and I think really like you know, these are tough programs, and you know, there's no doubt that this is difficult. And on that note, that this is difficult and challenging, you know, there's another question which is really saying, are there any topics that are too challenging to learn virtually, or are there something that absolutely require an in-person environment?
No, I mean, like if you think, we have a self-driving car engineer nano degree. Now you can't just start there. You actually have to learn, you know,
Right.
you have to take some foundational, you know, Udacity
Yeah.
courses to get there. But we have, I think, graduated more self-driving car engineers than all universities combined.
Very
And
cool.
your capstone project, you literally upload your code into Udacity's self-driving car, and that car using your code drives around the parking lot, right? And it stops in red, it goes on green, it doesn't hit stuff. And so, so no, like you have to start at the appropriate level. Like maybe you're absolute beginner or entry level. We've had truck drivers who have become software developers, right? And so you need to start at the appropriate level and kind of work your way up. But I don't think there is anything that is, you know, too hard. Now, if you're not an analytical person, then it might be hard to get to AI, right? Maybe the basic analytics is super high value add, and that's good for you. But I think like if you put your mind to it, you work hard, that you'll get there. You know, one thing I wanted to touch on though is just going back to COVID, and not just analytics, but how it kind of affects what we do as marketers.
Yeah.
You know, the things that have changed, and if I think about, I'm going to put my enterprise marketing hat on for a second. We've talked a lot about consumer. You know, physical conferences and physical conference lead gen is dead. On-premises meetings are dead. Physical direct marketing is dead because people aren't in the office, right?
Yeah.
And so this is super disruptive. COVID is super disruptive.
Right.
As you think about like enterprise marketing, becomes for Blueshift like super important to have your own in-house lead list and database and ways of mining that database.
And doing virtual events like this.
Yeah. Well, so let me talk about that.
Right.
And so, you know, we have a big enterprise business. We're like, oh my God, what do we do? We're launching a AI for healthcare nano degree, and we have no way to promote that. And so the team, you know, came up with an idea that I was honestly a little skeptical about, but said, great, if you feel passionate, go do it. Turns out I was wrong, they were right. And their idea was like to create an AI for healthcare in the time of COVID virtual conference. They went out and found like literally the #1 speaker in the United States on AI and healthcare, as it relates to healthcare, a dozen other world-renowned speakers, and we now have, it launches next week, 12,000 registrants from our target audience for a healthcare conference we thought of like 4 weeks ago. And enterprises are attending, it's medical professionals are attending. We have reporters from the Wall Street Journal and Forbes attending. Like, we had never thrown a conference in our lives. And so it's a great time to be creative and do stuff you never would have done before. Like, we never would have done that before, but like, because all of our normal channels of communication were closed, there's great opportunity for innovation here.
Very, very cool. No, that's very cool. Now, just switching gears, the last question we have from the audience is actually around what Blueshift technology has been most beneficial for Udacity. And I know you've kind of seen Blueshift in action a little bit at LendingTree because you were CMO when we started working with you. And you know, it turns out over the course of time, we again overlapped with you in a work capacity at Udacity. And obviously, Scott from your team has been very kind to share in our previous sort of discussion groups, which was actually a physical meetup a few months back. He has been very kind to share some of the innovations and the technology stack you've done with Blueshift around connecting all elements of the customer journey, automation at scale, multi-channel, and using AI to figure out the right time, the right content. I know a lot of this has been applied to LendingTree as well. So would love your perspective on what Blueshift technology has been most beneficial for Udacity, and if you want to take it for LendingTree as well.
Yeah, look, I mean, what Blueshift really opened my eyes was actually back when Josh was running CRM for LendingTree. And, you know, at the time we were delivering some basic CRM campaigns. We had a data science group that was building one-off models, but that was super painful and super slow. And the Blueshift platform is it's just so easy to use and to apply, machine learning algorithms. And that was really our first kind of move into like, mass application of machine learning algorithms, and just the power of the platform, the simplicity of the platform, how easy it is to get going and get like outsized results. Josh and team were able to, I think like our revenue and through our CRM efforts are up like 40x, like unbelievable. And it all really kind of started with getting the right platform in place, getting the right process, the targeting, and make sure like your messages are super relevant to that audience and all of that.
Yeah, no, that's fabulous. I think thank you for sharing that insight. And with that, let's come to the end of today's discussion. Today's lucky winner who gets a Uber Eats gift card is Jonas Pegman from Discovery. And Gabe, thank you for walking through your career journey and sharing all of your insights. I think there's been a ton of stuff that we unpacked here, really about dealing with crisis situations, but also dealing with a new normal where everything is going to be changing. And I keep coming back to the quote from you, which is about some doors will close, but others will open. And really, it's all about how do you become prepared as an individual and as a company to be able to go through those open doors as quickly as possible, and having that comfort level of being comfortable with failing, trying new things, raising your hand, and leveraging great resources like Udacity to upskill yourself constantly. So thank you for sharing all of that. I've really enjoyed the discussion, and we'll be applying a lot of these lessons to Blueshift, and obviously I'll be applying these personally to myself. We'll be back tomorrow at the same time. Tomorrow's session features marketers from Discovery, US Auto Parts, and Artifact Pricing, and they'll be talking about the importance of connecting the entire customer experience. So be there. On that note, we'll sign off for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Vijay.
Thanks, everyone.